Hi everyone, this is my EDL 854 Module 12 case study of the budget debacle. So what's happening here? Briardale Elementary School Principal Carlos Santos, he helped train the newly appointed Briardale Foundation President, Mr. Barely, a Harvard graduate and parent who plans to raise more money than anybody has ever done in any of the past uh, fundraisers. He proposes his idea to sell tickets for a raffle for cash event to the foundation, and they're all thrilled about it, excited. Everybody's in support of this. The night of the event, a sheriff comes into the event, takes Mr. Barely into custody because this is, in fact, an illegal fundraiser. He ended up being convicted of a misdemeanor and placed on probation, and this left the principal very embarrassed and a really negative mark on the foundation and the school. So, looking at who's involved and who should be concerned, there's a whole slew of people that should be concerned in this. Mr. Santos, the principal, ultimately, I think this is something that really kind of fell into his lap, and it was something that he should have been more aware of. So, this definitely does. This has to be a huge concern for him. Mr. Barely, unfortunately, the poor guy thought he was doing a great thing for the school. He found out that it doesn't matter if you have great intentions. The law is the law, and if you do something illegal, you're going to be charged. The superintendent should be almost as embarrassed as the principal, given that this is something that one of his principals at one of his schools let slide by and they didn't notice it. I kind of wonder how much the superintendent may have known even about this event taking place. Given this magnitude of the event, you would think the superintendent would be aware of it. So this really kind of is a smear to him as well. The Briardale Foundation has lost an awful lot of credibility. They put together something that was supposed to be huge. It was supposed to generate all this funding for these supplemental programs, and now they have nothing. The school site curriculum committee and lead teacher. This is a weird area for me with the reading, with the case study. I wish there had been a little bit more information about the school site curriculum committee and lead teacher, because one of the things it did say that any kind of information should have been run through as to what they were raising the funds for. So I don't know if that was more of the supplemental materials or if he or she was actually supposed to be involved in figuring out fundraising for it as well. The community's got to be somewhat outraged, but at the same time, I do think that the community probably is more understanding in this situation than not. But you never really know. Depending on what kind of community it is, you're not really sure if they would be totally outraged at the oversight or if they would be indeed understanding. So the legal and ethical issues. Has anyone been harmed by the action or the decision of another? And if so, in what way? Mr. Barely. He's done harm by not... he's been actually harmed, I feel like, by not maybe having the right kind of training on appropriate fundraising activities. He's been arrested. This is going to be horribly embarrassing for him. Not only has he been arrested, he's a parent, so his child attends this school in this district. He's also a Harvard graduate, which is horribly embarrassing, I'm sure, to him that his reputation has been pretty much destroyed in this one event, and it's, again, horribly embarrassing. Mr. Santos, he's probably lost a great deal of credibility with his school and his community for overseeing these activities. He has failed probably to provide the appropriate training and checks and balances that are needed to prevent this from occurring. The Briardale Foundation, they've again lost some credibility. It would be very hard for some people to buy into a lot of the fundraising activities possibly in the future. Community members that put time and energy into this fundraiser, it's probably been really detrimental to the morale for this school. And again, the superintendent probably is coming into question as to what kind of training he's provided his principals with in order to ensure that they understand district and foundation finances. Um, Again, the school foundation, they've wasted time and money. They got to figure out how to put together new fundraisers to help raise money for these supplemental programs. The school and parents, they've also been affected by this, especially if funding isn't available for these supplemental programs that they have. Um, it goes, this case goes against the fundraising and raffling and gambling laws that were broken within the state. Um, I think in Massachusetts, which is where Harvard was, I don't think they have as strict guidelines. I don't know that it is illegal. I couldn't find any information saying that it was illegal in Massachusetts. And that may have been part of the conflict with this. Something that may have been legal in one state isn't necessarily legal in another state. So I think that may be why this Harvard graduate who something went fine for them while they were in Harvard isn't going to work in another state. Um, and it's also maybe a difference in high school policies. But there was really no breach in contract as far as being discriminatory or harassing in nature. Um, One of the questions in our paper was what were the legal consequences possibly for this? And basically, because of the illegal nature of this, my question was, is there going to be a fine attached? Are there fines that the school is going to have to pay due to this taking place? So, what is happening? When schools are left to do their own fundraising to assist in the inclusion of supplemental programs, they must be cautious to ensure that the fundraising activities are within the confines of the law and that schools have procedures that provide clear checks and balances to ensure this. So, the facts, the people. So, some of the questions that arose from this are, how was Mr. Barely chosen to be the president of the foundation? Um, I kind of wonder if they looked at the fact that he was a Harvard graduate, if the principal put more trust in him and maybe disregarded more of those checks and balances that he would have had with somebody that hadn't graduated from Harvard University. How extensive was the training Mr. Barely was provided upon being selected as president? And that, again, falls into what I just said about, I wonder how extensive it really was. Was the lead teacher for the school site curriculum committee ever consulted for this fundraiser? Again, that was a question that I wasn't really certain on, of the role that the school site curriculum committee played. And it may in the future have provided as a better check and balance if somebody in the school had been involved in this fundraiser and it wasn't maybe just parents. With this being such a large event, why did the superintendent not know what was taking place and the law surrounding it? So again, I think the superintendent, it still does, even though it doesn't directly fall on him, I do wonder at what point did he not realize this was going on. The program itself, it's K through 5 elementary school with 600 students. It's a really large school district. There's 6 elementary schools. There's a foundation for each of these schools, so it's very competitive. Supplementary programs depend on this funding in order to operate. These are the fine arts, the music programs, all these programs that enrich a school and help students to be better, well-rounded students. So again, did the foundation ever have clear guidelines for fundraising activities? And I'll get into that a little more later. The place, again, is Briardale Elementary School. Again, this leads me to believe that it was a fairly large urban city, and the school had large events at this elementary school that involved a very large number of community members. Oh. Okay, so Section 5, could the conflict, the situation, or the decision be damaging to stakeholders of the community? This is a little repetitive, but the community loses confidence in the competency of their school leaders. Students, parents, teachers rely on money from these for these supplementary programs, so they're going to be without. The principal needs to repair community relationships. The school site curriculum committee could be in question. Again, that's only if it really did have a link to making these decisions. Mr. Barely is publicly humiliated and could be removed from his position, and the superintendent and the principal and school look bad due to front page newspaper articles. So, what individuals and groups have an important stake in the outcome? Mr. Santos, the principal, needs to regain trust of his community and school. Mr. Barely may or may not be allowed to remain on the foundation. The superintendent will need to improve his district's image. Teachers, students, and parents are now trying to figure out how they're going to provide enough money for these supplementary programs. Have all the relevant stakeholders been consulted? Again, these are the superintendent, principal, foundation, and maybe the lead teacher, again, in question. I'm not 100% certain if that is something that really needed to come into play. So what can I learn more about this situation? What are the district policies and procedures, and in what way are they presented to the foundation? What measures did the school take to ensure that parents are in compliance with the law when fundraising? So did the principal provide the guidelines appropriate for appropriate fundraising activities and activities that would be illegal or inappropriate methods to raise money? Again, one of the things we learned in our class throughout the semester is to be very thorough. And even if you say all the things that you are allowed to do, you almost need to have all the things you are not allowed to do to close any of those loopholes or any of those misconceptions one may have. So enough information I felt was given for this case study to make a decision, with the exception of the questions that still exist as to the school site curriculum committee. I wasn't quite sure what role they played. So the options: do nothing, take no action. Consequences: there's very little conflict within the school. Future fundraisers, though, could break laws that could have been prevented. Option 2: become informed over fundraising. Create policies that establish guidelines and accept a responsibility to begin rebuilding community relations. Allow Mr. Barely to be on the foundation committee, but not as president. Consequences of that are still the mistrust in leadership that they've got going on and the anger over shortages in the budget. The third option: remove Mr. Barely from the committee and Mr. Santos as school principal. Depending on how grievous they felt like this was and how grievous the community did, that may be an option. That seems extreme. Consequences: you could upset teachers and faculty depending on the likability factor and how well the principal really does perform for that school. The community would be kind of broken for some time over this, and the superintendent could appear rash and extreme in his decision making. So evaluate your options. Option 1, do nothing. Pros: allow Mr. Barely to take full responsibility for the illegal fundraising for the school. The principal just goes ahead and lets him take all the blame. It'll limit conflicts for the principal. Do nothing. The cons of that: future fundraising efforts could also break the law if you don't address the problem. Relationships with the community would remain strained, and the Briardale Foundation's reputation may be permanently damaged. Option 2, become informed over fundraising. Create policies that establish guidelines, accept responsibility to begin rebuilding community relations, and allow Mr. Barely to be on the foundation committee, but not as president. So the pros, the good things about this are: by accepting the responsibility, the principal will begin to regain respect and help Mr. Barely also regain that respect in the community. Policies and procedures will be descriptive and explain both acceptable and unacceptable fundraising options for foundations, and focus on fundraising for supplementary programs can resume fundraising as soon as possible. The cons of this are: some people may feel that someone should have lost a job over it, given that it was such a big mistake and so embarrassing for the school and the district. Changing district policies and procedures can be time consuming and would need board approval most likely. And fines may still be incurred from the illegal fundraising that took place. Option 3, that's firing everybody, the principal and Mr. Barely, the president of the foundation. The pros of this: the foundation can appoint a new president, ensure he knows the law when fundraising. They can kind of start over and make sure everything's in place. The principal would have shared in the responsibility of the poor choice in fundraising and have consequences for not maintaining proper checks and balances. And then the superintendent would look as if he does not tolerate incompetence. The pros, that should have said cons, my mistake. The cons of this: superintendent may look bad to those who like the job that Mr. Santos did as a principal. Many people feel that Mr. Barely made an honest mistake while trying to help the school. Firing both employees would not improve fundraising guidelines. Policies would still need to be revisited, and some may feel that the superintendent also played a role in not providing appropriate training to Mr. Santos, so he's once again passing the buck. So choosing the best option, option 2 by far was the best option. You got to be informed over fundraising policies, create policies, establish guidelines, accept responsibility, and help to rebuild the community relations. Mr. Bailey can remain involved, but probably not as president. So in reflecting, option 2 seemed like the only route that should be taken, with the exception of whether or not Mr. Bailey should or could maintain his position. Developing procedures and policies that all stakeholders understand should be the aim of every principal, especially when applying laws in the creation of financial events. Those mistakes, as seen in this case, can prove to be expensive and damaging to schools and communities. The Superintendent Principal School Site Curriculum Committee and Briardale Foundation should work to develop policies that ensure the laws are followed when fundraising. Fundraising should resume as soon as possible to ensure equitable resources to the supplemental programs and availability to students. And then the principal should advocate for continued community involvement and trust in the school with the adoption of improved policies. So he's really going to need to put himself out there to try and build those community relations again. So implementing the decision, what is my chosen path? So the first thing is the principal needs to address the public with an apology. And I do think he needs to take full responsibility, because I think even without him taking full responsibility, people are still going to put a lot of blame on Mr. Bailey. But I think just as an administrator, I think you have to step up and own your mistakes. And I think this happened under his watch. It was in his school. He should take full responsibility for the error in fundraising. It may be a good idea to also write an editorial concerning this incident, since it has been in the paper already. So it might be one thing to put it out there verbally, but I think maybe even in writing might be a good idea too. And of course, this should be coordinated with the superintendent, but to maybe explain and help to regain trust with the community. So communicate with the superintendent to find out if I'm even able to keep Mr. Bailey on as the member of the Briardale Foundation. I do think his heart was in the right place. I don't think that there was there weren't any negative intentions. He didn't purposely mean to break the law, but the law is the law, so he still did it. So I think that in itself probably should cause him to not be the president of the foundation. But as far as remaining in the foundation, I don't think you should necessarily kick him out if he still wanted to be part of it. But I think maybe appointing a new president and begin steps to eliminate repeated mistakes in fundraising activities. So in order to do that, you need to establish a committee that will help rewrite the policies and procedures for fundraising, request research legal aspects of different types of fundraising activities, and be able to list them as acceptable and unacceptable. Again, just giving hard, cold examples of what is right and what is wrong, what's acceptable, what's unacceptable would be so helpful to these committees when they're trying to put things together. Improve management using a clear chain of command with fundraising activities. All activities should be approved by the principal prior to being placed into action. And then if it's something really huge, I do think that it should run through the superintendent as well. And principals must be current on fundraising laws in their state. And then establish a budget with existing funds. So whatever they have left, develop short-term and long-term needs for supplemental programs. Really hard decisions may need to be made in this situation based on these supplemental programs. So what could happen and how could you manage it? The public could want more severe consequences for the principal, Mr. Santos, due to his lack of supervision of fundraising events. The superintendent would most likely have taken the action to write the incident up, and it would become part of the principal's file. But I think time would most likely be needed in order to repair the community relations and the trust again in this principal and his ability to be effective as a principal. Teachers may feel strained relations and mistrust for the principal. Budget issues can be difficult enough, but when they can directly affect teacher and student opportunities. It can make them so much greater. This could be looked at as a preventable mistake by many of the teachers. So he's going to still have to work on relationships even within his building. Some may feel that Mr. Bailey was blamed too harshly for his role in the raffle for cash event. By keeping him on the foundation, one may be ease the tension. Finding another president may also be difficult due to the immediate need to raise money to compensate for the failed event. And then further establish guidelines to include regulations for tax exempt status, as well as IRS regulations when fundraising. So, Plan B, what might you do next if the chosen plan of action doesn't completely work? Given that Mr. Bailey was charged and he's on probation for this misdemeanor, he may not be legally allowed to be involved in the Briardale Foundation any longer. So that would have to be double checked. Alternative fundraising sources could be implemented, such as DonorsChoose.org or other crowdfunding sources to raise money for supplemental programs. I should have written in there also that grants should be looked into as a possibility to try and help raise money for these supplemental programs. Checks and balances must be frequent in order to ensure the legal regulations are followed in fundraisers. So if a chain of command is not followed and activities are not cleared by the principal, corrective action should take place. Foundation could be turned over to a committee of teachers that volunteer and replace the role of parents. It may be easier to help teachers understand the legal ramifications involved in fundraising, and the principal may be able to keep better checks and balances if it is run by teachers. But I do think that takes an element of community relations away from a school. I think it's great that parents are involved in fundraising for schools. Superintendent might do away with the foundation if problems persist. It could be big enough that it would already be done away with, and funding may have to come from other sources. But I think that would be kind of a last ditch effort if something were to happen again. Due to competing interests, unbiased committees may be needed to help prioritize a shortened budget. So again, I think with the problem of losing funding, you're going to have so much more competing interest within the school as to what programs get what. And so I do think this is where teachers and faculty need to get together and really prioritize where the needs are for students and what activities are most desired within the community, and real tough decisions may need to be made based on those shortened budget problems. And so that is the conclusion of my case study. Thank you very much.